This is episode number 161. Today we're featuring artist Debra Joy Groesser, president of the American Impressionist Society, AIS.
This is the PleinAir Podcast with Eric Rhoads, publisher and founder of PleinAir Magazine. In the PleinAir Podcast, we cover the world of outdoor painting. Called plein air, the French coined the term, which means open air or outdoors. The French pronounce it plein air. Others say plein air. No matter how you say it, there is a huge movement of artists around the world who are going outdoors to paint. And this show is about that movement. Now, here's your host, author, publisher, and painter, Eric Rhoads.
Thank you, Jim Kipping, and welcome to the PleinAir Podcast. If you're listening to this as it's released right on time, I'm leaving this week for a few days in Russia. I'll be painting in Russia in the winter in the snow, which is pretty darned exciting. I think what they tell me is they put vodka in their paint to keep it from freezing up, and they probably put a little vodka on the inside of themselves to keep themselves from freezing up. I guess I'll find out. I'll be shooting an instructional video with a world-famous Russian master, which will be announced soon. And I'm working on 2 different documentaries. So I have interviews set up with some of the top museum people and some of the top schools. It's going to be pretty exciting. Plus, I'm doing site selection for my summer 2021 Publishers Invitational trip into the places in Russia where Levitan and Shishkin and Repin and others painted. It's going to be a lot of fun. I'll tell you more about that in the future. So if you want to follow what's going on, check me out on Instagram or Facebook. It's Eric Rhoads, R-H-O-A-D-S. On Facebook, I'm at my limit of friends, but you can still follow it. I know that. Anyway, I get back just in time for the final last-minute details done for the PleinAir convention. I hope you're coming. I hope to see you there. This is our biggest yet. We've blown out all the attendance records from the past. And by the time you go to the website, if there are no seats left, I know it's down to the last few. If there are no seats left, there will be a waiting list in case somebody drops out. At the time I'm recording this, there's not many. So visit pleinairconvention.com. Also, you have until March 15th, I believe it is, to enter your paintings for the final season of PleinAir Salon Art Competition. This is the last bi-monthly, and then all the winners in any category get entered into the judging for the annual prize, which has $27,000 or $30,000 in cash prizes, plus $15,000 for the main winner. The first prize, you also get the cover of PleinAir Magazine. If you're not a subscriber, by the way, to PleinAir Magazine, check that out. Anyway, you can enter at pleinairsalon.com. Coming up after the interview, I'll be doing art marketing questions and also the art marketing podcast now. It's called the Art Marketing Minute. It is now a podcast of its own if you want to check that out, if you don't want to listen to this. Heaven forbid. Let's get right to our interview with Debra Joy Groesser. Debra Joy Groesser, welcome to the PleinAir Podcast.
Thank you, Eric. I sure appreciate you having me.
You know, I can't even believe it. All this time has passed and we haven't done a podcast yet. And it's like, I was looking the other day and thought, wait a minute, we never did her. So here you are, this prominent, important person, and we completely forgot you. So please accept my apologies.
Oh my gosh. Oh, I don't know about prominent and important, but I'll take it. Thank you.
I guess the benefit is, you know, we did a lot of we started out with, you know, really big, important names when we launched the podcast just about 2 years ago. And the good news now is that there's so many more people listening than then. Of course, you can listen to the back episodes, and a lot of people do. So it might be to your benefit now. It's just that, you know, we're well over 1 million downloads on this podcast. And so who knows what will happen as a result.
Well, I'm ready and grateful. So thank you again.
I'm trying to remember, but I think the first time we met would have been, I'm thinking maybe the Las Vegas, the very first PleinAir convention. but it may
You
not have
are
been
right.
that one.
It was. Yep.
Wow.
I was there. Yep. That was a long time ago now, huh?
Yeah. Well, I remember we had such a hard time selling that because first off, that was the first plein air convention and nobody knew what a plein air convention was. You know, and I think they had these visions of, when you say convention, they had these visions of people running around with lampshades on their head or something. But, and then the other one was selling Las Vegas because, Las Vegas, you think of glitzy lights, and we were out on the corner at Red Rocks and beautiful.
Yep.
Do you remember that snowstorm?
I do. I remember freezing when we were out there doing our big paint out, and the sleet was coming down and hitting us. But boy, I was so surprised because I'd never been, outside of the city of Las Vegas. I didn't even know how beautiful it was all around there.
Yeah, it
was
really
great,
was.
So.
Really was special. I don't think I'd ever been so cold in all my life though, because I don't think anybody was prepared for that random snowstorm that came. And
nope, I know I wasn't.
But it was fun. We were out painting and everybody was a trooper. And I remember some woman, I can't remember her name, but she had kind of lavender hair. And she came up to me and she said, "Thank you so much." She said, I would never have experienced painting in conditions like this, because I just would never do it on my own. And she said, I discovered that I have it in me. I discovered I can do this. So that was kind of fun.
Yeah. Yeah, that's great. That's great. I actually, one of my favorite stories from that convention was there was a woman that I met while we were out there painting in those terrible conditions. And I didn't even know from that point on, she started following me and, on social media and my newsletter and things. And a couple of years ago, she ended up coming to a show and bought a couple of paintings. And I hadn't seen her since the convention. And so now she's a wonderful collector. So, you just never know.
No, you never do. And you think about it, there were people at that event who were attendees who now are, who were virtually unheard of, who now are on the stage. It's really interesting to watch. And, careers like yours and others who, you were already pretty prominent at the time, but to watch your career soar and to watch so much about what you've done since then, it's pretty remarkable. And we're going to dig into that a little bit today, if that'd be okay.
Sure. Oh, absolutely.
So for the benefit of somebody who might be listening in Dubai or India or something, and they might not know your story, tell us just briefly, how would you describe yourself as a painter?
Well, I do both landscape and portraits, and my main love is plein air painting. I got hooked on that about 25 years ago now, or more. But my style, I guess, is kind of impressionistic, realistic. I'm kind of on the more realistic end of impressionism, I guess is how I would describe it. But I do it full time. I've been a full-time artist since '97, and just try to paint as much as I can.
Well, let's talk about your journey as an artist then.
Yeah.
You were, if I remember correctly, you were a real estate agent. How did you go from being a real estate agent to becoming an artist?
Well, I actually was an artist first, and then took a detour into real estate. So I got my art degree in college, and it was from a small liberal college. It was a liberal arts college. It's private college, and it was pretty self-directed as far as painting. So not a lot of like showing techniques and all that kind of thing. But when I got out of college, the first job that I got was as a graphic designer at a bank. And I did that for a few years until I had my kids. I got married, had my 2 kids, and then decided to stay home with them. And I did some freelancing. And then my first husband was a home builder and decided to start his own building company. And so one thing led to another, and I ended up getting a real estate license so I could sell his homes. And I really missed painting and really missed my art. And so my password, and for everybody listening, I don't use this password for anything anymore, but my password for the multiple listing computer was artist. And I just kept telling myself every time I logged into that computer that I was reminding myself that this is just temporary. I'm really an artist. This is just temporary. And someday I'm going to get back to my art.
I'm going to stop you there for just a second.
Yeah,
because
Yep.
I think there's an important lesson in that, from a marketing perspective. And let me tell you why. First off, what you did is you took a goal or a dream and you forced it into something that you had to use every day. You had to look at it every day. Mm-hmm. And the idea of looking at something and thinking about something every day can make such a huge difference. I'll tell you two stories about that. Both of them have to do with cars. The first one is I told myself years ago, back in the 1980s, I had owned a small radio station in Provo, Utah, and Salt Lake City. And it was a struggling station, and I didn't know if I'd ever make any money or not. But I told myself that one day when I made my first $1 million, when I sold the radio station one day, I was going to buy myself a Porsche because I always wanted to have a Porsche. So I took a picture of a Porsche and I cut it out and I stuck it on my mirror in my bathroom. And every morning and every night I see that Porsche. And even though you kind of get to the point where you don't even notice it anymore, it's implanting into your subconscious mind. Yep. And, after about a year, all of a sudden the phone rang and somebody wanted to buy that radio station and I sold it. I made my first money and then I bought a Porsche. Now, being the conservative guy that I am, I bought a used one because I didn't want to go buy a new one. But so the same thing happened to me the other day. I've been driving the same car for 17 years. And I told myself I was going to drive this car until we got to the point where my kids graduated from high school, and then I'd get something a little nicer. And so 17 years, my kids are getting ready to graduate, and I kept saying to my son, son, one day I'm going to own XYZ car. I'm not going to say what it is. And he said, Dad, you'll never do it. You'll never do it. And he said to me yesterday as I was driving him in the new car, he said, Dad, you've been talking about this for 10 years. Why did you just now do it? I said, well, it took 10 years of repetition. But I think the idea of putting that in your password, what a great idea. Yeah.
It made all the difference. And, he was my first husband was a home builder. So I started doing drawings of the houses, renderings of the houses so we could put them on flyers to hand out during open house and things like that. And one of my realtor friends saw those, and she brought me a note card one day, and it had a pen and ink drawing of someone's house. And she said, could you do something like this for me? And I'd like to give these out as housewarming presents. And so I did a set of note cards for her, did a pen and ink drawing of this house that she had sold. She gave it to him as a housewarming gift. And then pretty soon a couple other realtors said, well, can you do that for me? And then a couple other builders said, well, can you do renderings for me? And long story short, eventually, I went through a divorce, and, first husband was not supportive of the art part at all, and actually said I was no good at art and I would never do anything with it, so quit wasting your time.
That's the wrong thing to tell somebody like you.
Yeah. Well, I was pretty crushed, to start with, because, I think when you're born with that creative spirit, it's not what you do, it's who you are. So it was like saying, like I wasn't valid as a person almost, is almost how it made me feel. But eventually, it's amazing how things work out and things fall into place. And eventually, I kept doing these note cards, and then I was doing house portraits. I was doing little pen and ink drawings with watercolor on them, and just selling the heck out of them. And I got to the point, a couple of years later, Don and I got married, and I know you've met my husband, Don. It wasn't long before I was making just as much money doing these house portraits and drawings and things as I was selling houses. And so
and
he said, well,
fun.
And it was a heck of a lot more fun. And then, he saw some of the paintings I had done back in the day, and he just looked at me one day and he said, honey, how do we get you back to your art full time? What would it take? And I said, gosh, I guess I really hadn't thought about it. And he said, well, what about teaching? Could you teach? And I said, well, I'm still selling real estate full time, but yeah, I suppose I could. And so we just sat down and started brainstorming. We had this unfinished room down in our basement that was probably, 18 by 24, something like that. And so he said, come on down here. Let's go downstairs. So he said, do you think this room would be big enough for a classroom? And I thought, well, yeah, maybe so. And he said, well, what would you need? And I need a sink, and I need this. I need some tables and some chairs and some shelves. And okay. And 2 weeks later, it was done. And he just went at it and got it all done. He said, okay, here's your classroom. So how are you going to get students? And so when I was in real estate, looking back now, it was such a blessing that I had that training, in selling and marketing. And one of the things that I had done was started a newsletter. It was a paper newsletter, and when I first started it, I couldn't afford to mail them all out, so my kids and I would stuff them in door hanger bags and walk and deliver 2,500 of them around the neighborhoods. So I was doing that newsletter, and I said, well, I'm just going to put a little ad in my own newsletter and, say how I had my art degree, and I was going to start offering classes for kids. So I did classes after school from 4 to 5:30, and I filled my classes. I was teaching 5 days a week within a year during that 4 to 5:30 time frame. And that was a time when I usually didn't have real estate clients because, we either had clients during the day or we had them in the evening. So it just worked out great. And then I guess it was probably 1996. So my business had taken over the basement, had taken over the spare room, had taken over our office, and then it was spilling out into the dining room. And my husband said, I think it's time for us to find a place for your career here. And there was a little building for sale down in our little downtown, and we went and looked at it and bought it, and it was big enough for the first year, and then I outgrew it really fast. So we did a big addition, 2-story addition, and built my dream studio, opened a little gallery, had a classroom, and that's how it all started. And we opened that in 97, and that's still where my studio is today.
Wow.
And
so you taught kids, and that's how many years ago when you first started doing that?
Oh, I think it was probably around 92, 93.
All right.
Right, so around it there. Yeah.
A long time ago, long enough that some of those kids are adults. And
oh, yeah.
And do you have any examples or stories of how taking that one simple art class with you may have impacted some kids?
Oh, yeah. I have 2 students that are award-winning architects now, and I have a couple others who teach art. I have a couple that are interior designers. I have some that are graphic designers. But my favorite story, and I'm so glad you asked this, there was probably one of my favorite students. He was really quiet. I had him and his sister both. And he would come in and sit down. He was so talented. He had so much natural ability as far as drawing. He could draw anything I put in front of him. And he stayed on task. He just was really into it. And I told his mom one day, when she came to pick him up, I said, my gosh, he is just such a joy to have. He stays on task. He works hard. He just does such beautiful work. And she looked at me like I had three eyes in my head, and she said, what, my kid? And I said, yeah. And she said, do you know he's failing in school? And the way he was in school and the way he was with me in the art classes were completely opposite. And so fast forward to about, 4 years ago, I think it was. So this young man's mother is the president of one of the big credit unions here in town now. And so we were invited, since my husband's mayor, we were invited to the grand opening of their brand new headquarters building. And we walked in, and she was there, and she said, my son is here, and he can't wait to see you. So this is the son that I had in class all those years ago. And he walked up, and he's in his 30s now, and he designed that building, and he won a big architectural award for that. And he came up to me, and he said, I just have to tell you that without you and your encouragement, I would not be doing what I'm doing. He said, you were the one who taught me that it's okay to be creative. And just because you're creative doesn't mean you're stupid. You're okay. And that's something special. And he said, without that, I never would have had the courage to go on and do what I did. And of course, I just melted into a pile of tears. And I called my daughter that night. My daughter is an elementary school principal, and I shared that story with her, and I'm just crying. And she said, well, Mom, now you know why we teach. Because, knowing that you made a difference in just that one life, that to me is probably my most rewarding thing that has ever happened in my art career, was just that, knowing that it made such a difference for that boy, and that now he's a successful man and with a beautiful family and supporting his family, all because of an art class he took.
Yeah. Well, I think we sometimes forget the impact we have on people. The idea of encouragement can go so far. When I'm out plein air painting, if kids come up and the parents are with them, I'll say to the parent, do you mind if I give your kid a little lesson real quick? And they'll say, sure, or sometimes they don't. And I'll put the brush in their hand, and I'll say, okay, here's how you mix the color, and we'll mix the color. I say, now put it on my painting right there, and I'll show them. And I'll say, now you do it, you do the next one. And they'll do it, and I don't care if they mess up my painting. I can fix it later. But they light up, and then I say to the parents, this is called plein air painting, and here's how you can go learn it, and your kid might be interested. So sometimes it's just a matter of taking that spark. Yeah,
it is. It just, it breaks my heart that, art programs are being cut so much, in the schools. And I mean, it's just, it's the lifeblood for some of these kids. Not everyone fits into that neat little box, and not everybody learns the same way. And I think creative people learn so differently than others. And so I was very, very grateful to have had that chance to work with him. So
Debra, I think that this idea of taking art out of the schools is really starting to cause other problems too, because you have a generation of kids who may not ever have become artists, but they would have been exposed to art in school, but were not. And so now this is a generation of kids who are buying homes and cars and properties, and who do not necessarily have not been sensitized, so to speak, to art, have not been exposed to it. And I think that part of the responsibility that you have and I have and all of us have, quite frankly, is to try and look for ways that we can educate people who never got that opportunity to be educated.
Right. Absolutely. Absolutely.
How did this plein air thing begin for you? How did you decide to go outdoors painting?
Oh gosh. Well, actually, in college, we did a few plein air excursions with just with watercolor, just not far from the school. And I didn't think too much about it way back then because that was back in the 70s. But I took a workshop with Jim Wilcox out in the Tetons back, it was probably 97-ish. And it was quite an experience. The very first day, the winds were blowing 50 miles an hour, and we spent all day just chasing our hats and our easels, and our canvases were blowing off and everything. And I thought, well, this is a whole lot of fun. Not. But the second and third days, the rest of the workshop was really wonderful. And, painting out in the Tetons, and seeing all of the color that you see, all the purples and the pinks and the oranges and blues that you see in those mountains, it was just, I love being outside anyway. I was brought up, with a dad who was born and raised in the backwoods of Maine. So, being outdoors was a big part of my growing up. And so being outside and being in the Tetons was pretty special. And one of the things that probably the biggest lesson I learned from that was it was back before digital cameras. And so I had my 35 millimeter camera, and I think I shot 36 rolls of film of the Tetons. And I thought, I'm going to do all these wonderful paintings when I get home. And I came home and got that film developed, and everything was brown and gray. And I couldn't believe it. It was like, where were all those beautiful colors that I had seen? And so all I had to reference that was the plein air studies I had done during this workshop. And that was just a huge awakening for me, just the importance of painting from life. And so probably a year or two after that, I took a workshop with Kevin McPherson, and we were down in Bermuda. And he had me trying the Zorn palette and all kinds of things. And then he had us bring photos of our work, and he sat down and kind of did a little critique for everybody. And I'll never ever forget it. He looked at my portfolio, and then he looked at me and he said, if you stop painting from photos and you start painting from life all the time, we're going to be reading about you someday.
Wow.
And yeah, and that just blew my mind. And so I went on to study with Kevin. I've lost count how many times I've studied with him now, but he's become such a dear friend and a mentor to me. And he literally changed my life. I mean, he really opened up my eyes to plein air painting in a way that I never imagined. And I just was hooked. It's something that, once you get the hang of it, I can't imagine not painting outdoors now.
Well, it's and those of us, people like yourself, I shouldn't include myself in that category, people like you who people look up to, there's a wonderful responsibility that comes with the idea of encouragement. I think that, you don't want to be blowing smoke or false encouragement, but you do want to look for any opportunity to give somebody a lift, and you never know what that lift is going to do. That's
Absolutely.
Kevin is such a warm and giving and lovely person, and he has done so much for this, I wanted to say industry, it's not an industry, but this movement, and has been such a leader and has been so gracious and so giving.
Yep. And that's something that really struck me, that, watching him do critiques and how, he always found the good, to say first. And it seems like, no matter how bad my painting was, he always found something good to say about it. He found one little nugget of something positive to say.
That's and
I think that became such a good lesson for me, and that's how I am with my students too. It's you have to find something positive. It just doesn't work to say, well, this is wrong, or you do this better, or whatever. There's always something to encourage people over, and I kind of feel like that's become kind of what I enjoy the most is that encouraging of people and inspiring them. And so I hope that's
well, you're doing it on a very big scale now. Let's talk about the American Impressionist Society and the role that you've taken on there, and talk about encouragement and having an impact on people's lives. First off, tell everybody, what is the American Impressionist Society, and how did you end up getting involved?
Well, the American Impressionist Society, or AIS for short, we are a national nonprofit art organization, and we do 2 national juried shows every year. We added a second show 4 years ago. So we do our big national one in the fall. Just had our 20th anniversary show at the Salmagundi Club in New York last September, which was really exciting. And then we do a small work show. And this year's small work show is coming up in March, next month in Texas. And we have about 1,700 members nationwide, and in conjunction with our shows, we do an educational program and a paint out and that kind of thing. And we have master members. We have 24 masters, and we have a couple hundred or so signature members, and then the rest are associate members. And so it's the way it came about. I entered juried shows. I decided to stick my neck out and kind of get outside my comfort zone and enter some national juried shows. And so, of course, OPA and AIS were the 2 main ones that I submitted to. And the AIS group, I ended up getting accepted into all but one show over a period of 10 years. And the other organization, it took me 13 tries to get in once. And so I thought, wow, I think this AIS might be where my work belongs. And so I started going to the shows. As I was getting accepted, I would go to the shows, and one of the shows I volunteered to help find the gallery venue for it. And I was at one show. We were at a gallery. I'm thinking it was maybe Indianapolis or Nashville. I don't remember which one, but I saw a gentleman sitting in the corner in a chair, and he was in the downstairs level of the gallery. And it turned out it was T.R. Dickinson, and T.R. and Charlotte Dickinson Charlotte was one of the 4 original founders of AIS. And I went up and talked to him and introduced myself, and he started coughing, and I went and got him a glass of water, and that was that, and never thought too much more about it. And a couple of years later, I get a phone call out of the blue, and they were looking for a new president. And he said, I never took your card that day, but I never forgot you and the kindness you showed me. And he said, your name came to me when we were talking about who to call. And talk about, being floored. I had no idea they even knew who I was. And I actually originally told them no, that I didn't think I could do that. And they said, well, just think about it, and we'll call you tomorrow, and just sleep on it. And so my husband comes home, and I said, you are not going to believe what happened today. I got this call from the American Impressionist Society, and they want me to be president. And he said, so what did you say? And I said, well, I said no. And he said, what? He said, of course you're going to do it. He said, who gets an opportunity? How many people get an opportunity like this to make a difference? And you can make a difference. And I'll be with you every step of the way. And I thought, whoa, okay, well, how do I say no now? And so they called me back the next day, and I said yes. And the rest is history. It's been quite a ride and such an honor. Wow. Never in a million years did I think I would be running a national art organization like this.
So
Never in a million years.
What is the purpose of AIS? What's the mission? Why should somebody become a member?
Well, the mission is to promote the appreciation of Impressionism through workshops, art exhibitions, and other media, and education. We're an educational nonprofit. And so what members tell us is they find that their work is accepted in our shows. Kind of the same experience I had is where their work isn't accepted in shows that are, more geared towards tighter realism. And AIS, Impressionism, we always get asked, what is the definition of Impressionism? And it encompasses such a wide range, and I think the fact that it is a very wide range from very loose, almost not abstract, but still representational. And an example would be like Eric Jacobson is one who's kind of on that end of the spectrum. And it goes all the way to the other end where it's not like photorealism, but it's a little bit more defined, but still loose. So I guess kind of like what I do. And so with that big range, and we also we accept oil, acrylic, watercolor, pastel, and gouache. And so it's not limited to one media. And so, there's a lot more variety and a bigger range of the type of work that's accepted, as well as the type of mediums that are accepted.
I see.
So a lot of people have told us, that one of the things they love about AIS is that, because of the variety, and they feel like they found their tribe with us because, they maybe paint looser and, it's not something that is accepted in a lot of other shows. So
but it doesn't have to be somebody who's purely impressionistic, does it?
No, not really. No, and you don't have to be juried in either. So you can join as an associate member, and you don't have to be juried in. So we have a lot of people that are just beginning their artistic journey. A lot of people that are just beginner painters. PleinAir painters. We have a lot of PleinAir painters that are members just because. PleinAir painting is inherently impressionistic because it's all about, painting the effects of light and that. So, so we have, like I said, I think we have about 1,700 members now from all over the country.
That's incredible. And when you joined, I think it was half that. You probably have doubled.
Yeah, when I became president in 2013, beginning of 2013, we had about 900 members. And we're at about 1,700 now. So.
That's very impressive.
Thanks.
Well, I think that everybody listening to this should consider it. And you can enter. Can you enter the competition as an associate member? Can you enter as a non-member? How does that work?
You have to be a member, and so our annual dues right now are $60, and we did just hire a new executive director. Well, actually not new, but our very first. And so that's really exciting because, with me being a full-time artist and then, all of our other officers are also full-time artists. So we've been running this as volunteers for the last, It's always been run by volunteers forever. Yeah. And now we actually have a professional full-time person who that's her job now, and we are so excited about that. And we're working on some new opportunities and things that have been on the back burner for a while that we just never had time to get to. So really, really exciting stuff in the works for AIS.
So congratulations on that. You talked about the importance of entering juried shows and shows. I would add to that competitions.
Mm-hmm. Yes. Absolutely.
From your perspective, because you were nervous about it in the beginning, what is the benefit to an artist to put themselves out there? Because if I enter a competition, I know I'm up against some pretty heavy talent, and so part of you says, well, why even bother to enter? Because there's somebody important out there who's going to get it. What is the mind shift that takes place when you start putting yourself out there?
Well, number one, you have to go into it knowing that the majority of people don't get accepted right away. In fact, like I said earlier, there's the one organization I entered 13. It was the 13th time before I was accepted into their national show. And by the way, the painting's name was Faith, Strength, and Perseverance, if that isn't crazy. But when you enter a juried show, the benefits are, or a competition, boy, if you get accepted, you have such an opportunity for, exposure, not only to galleries, but to magazines and, collectors and things like that. I think as far as, you need to make sure that the competitions and shows that you enter, I tell people, it's kind of like starting to ice skate or starting to learn a sport, and then the first year you enter the Olympics. you try out for the Olympics. Not a whole lot of people are going to get in, you know what I mean? But so, you might want to start with something on the local or regional level, and then after you have some success with that, then go on to the national ones. That was the path I took. The national shows, I actually, every single gallery I've ever been represented by, I gained representation because I was in a juried show that was shown at their gallery, every single one, without exception. And so I think that's pretty, that's a pretty good reason to stick your neck out and do it.
I think there's also a shift in your thinking when you put yourself out there. It's frightening.
It is.
You're putting yourself against isn't the right word, I guess, but you're putting yourself out there, and there are other artists competing for the same things, and by doing it, I think it just says something to your brain of, I'm getting serious about this now. I'm a player now, and whether or not you win, and by the way, sometimes people winning or getting accepted. I mean, if it's a competition, it's winning, or winning a category or something else. But I think the idea being that, you're now saying, okay, I'm moving up to a new level. I'm going to put myself out there. I'm going to try these things, and I may or may not make it, but I'm just going to keep beating that drum and keep getting out there, because that's what it takes. It takes persistence, perseverance, faith, etc.
Exactly. That's exactly what I did. And I thought, okay, so I'm up to this point, where I was getting into some regional things, and I thought, okay, this is the next step. And was I scared to death? Heck yeah. I was terrified. But, when I was in real estate, one of the lessons that we learned in all of the marketing seminars that we went to, you don't sit around and listen to the people that are standing around by the coffee pot complaining that they don't have any business. you do what the successful people do. You're out there putting yourself out there. You're sharing your work. You're sharing, in the case of artists, you've got to put your work out there somehow, because if you don't, there's an awful lot of people out there that are wonderful artists that nobody knows about because they haven't had the courage to, take that step. And so when I started entering these shows, I looked for, I think the important thing is look for shows or competitions that are, number one, comparable with your style of work. That, some are limited to specific media, so make sure that if you're going to enter something, make sure that your work would qualify.
Do your homework.
Yes, do your homework and follow the instructions on the prospectus to the letter. I can't tell you how many times that we end up seeing, images that are out of focus, or they're oriented the wrong way for the jurors, or they have grass in the background that people take a picture on the ground or on the bumper of their car and they don't crop it so that all you see is the painting itself. There's so many little things that will increase your chances of getting in. And I think another thing that you have to remember with these competitions and shows is that every single one, you're competing against a whole different group of paintings. So, we've all heard the Everett Raymond Kinsler story, I think, about how he had a painting that he entered in an exhibition one year and it was completely rejected. He entered the same painting in the same competition the following year and won the gold medal. And, that kind of thing happens all the time. So just because, you enter this painting in this show and it doesn't get in doesn't mean it's a bad painting. It just means that, if you enter it in another one, you're going to be in a whole different pool of competition.
Yeah, so there's two reasons to do that from my perspective, because we see this in our PleinAir salon all the time. First off, the judges oftentimes change, right?
Oh,
so
yeah.
One judge might favor a particular style or type of painting. The other reason is that the competition changes. And so you might be up against some really absolutely incredible paintings in one year, and the next year yours might be the absolutely incredible paintings, and there are lesser paintings behind you.
Yep, absolutely. And the number of paintings submitted changes all the time. So some shows you might have 500 paintings that are submitted and maybe 100 get accepted. So 20% get accepted. Our shows, we usually get 1,600 entries and, we might take 150. So, only 10% rather than 20%. So that's something to kind of check out too. If you can find those numbers, what do they average as far as the number of entries and how many do they accept and things like that.
But think about what that does for your head. Think about how if you submitted something and there are 1,500 other paintings or artists who are entering, and then you do get accepted, you're one of 150, that's really pretty special.
It is very special. It is very, very special. And one of the things I'm particularly proud about with AIS, we have every year we get brand new people that get accepted to our shows, and we do something called a blind jury, where the jurors, we have a panel of 5 jurors. So I'll just talk about the shows that I personally have been involved with jurying and that, but we have a panel of 5 jurors, and the jurors don't know who each other are, and they work independently from their own homes, their own computers, and they are not shown the names of the artists. It's just the title and the image and the size and the description, and that's all they see. And they score the painting from 1 to 7, And so, the highest possible score is 35 and the lowest possible score is 5. And what it boils down to is when all the jurying is done, the top scoring paintings are the ones that are accepted. And it's based on the number of paintings that the particular gallery has room for. So they have 150. It's the top 150 scoring paintings. So it's the most fair way that we've figured out, to do it. It's based solely on the quality of the piece that's submitted, and not on anything else. It's not based on who you are. It's not based on anything else.
And I'm sure being the head of an organization like that, people want to throw politics and friendships and all that stuff. And that's best to make sure that you have a system that overcomes all that. I want to move forward in a couple other areas before we wrap up, because we're going to run out of time before we know it. You had you decided, once you started doing your art school, you decided to open an art gallery. And I'm curious about what that experience has been like, what the pros and cons would be.
Okay, so when we first opened the gallery, we had it from 97 to about 2001. And then I started having opportunities to travel and teach, outside of Omaha, and which is where we live in Ralston, Nebraska, which is a suburb of Omaha. And I just found that being tied to retail hours, it kind of got to be a drag. And I had to have employees to cover when I wasn't there. And it just got to the point, it was just time to let it go. And, we started off, I was teaching, we had the gallery, I was doing my own commission work, and we were doing custom picture framing too. So we slowly looked at what was working and what was profitable and what wasn't. And that was all part of the decision in letting the gallery go at that point. And then fast forward now to 2 years ago, we have a florist that rents the bay where my gallery used to be, and then we had a hair salon on the other side in the front of our building. And she decided to retire 2 years ago, and the space is about twice the size of my old gallery on the other side. And I had probably 50 paintings sitting around upstairs in my studio, and we started getting more retail businesses in our little downtown area, and it just felt like the time was right to do it again. And so it's been open for 2 years now, and I'm only open Wednesday through Saturday, so I'm not open 7 days a week like I tried, 20 years ago. And it's just been a blast. I absolutely love it. I've got a couple of friends that come and help me when I can't be there. My husband started doing woodworking, and back when he retired, I told him he had to find something to do because he couldn't be in my studio standing over my shoulders when I'm painting. And so he took up woodworking. He's making beautiful pieces. So we have his work in the gallery, and since he's the mayor too, people love coming in and seeing what he does and seeing what I do. And we actually right now, I've had a couple of special shows now. So right now I've got some members of AIS that have some work there.
So I was going to ask you if you have other artists in your gallery, and the answer is yes.
I do now, yeah, just for special shows. So we're going to do special shows about 3 or 4 times a year.
So is there an upside that, for people who might be considering it, what are the upsides and what are the downsides real quickly?
The upsides are, it's having a retail space now. I've had the opportunity to get a lot more people in to see my work and my husband's work, and now introducing them to other people's work. It's given me a great exposure as far as in our greater Omaha area. The funny thing is, when you're an artist, it seems like you're a lot better known outside of your area. and not so much in your hometown. And people now are finding out that I'm here, and it's been really fun. And I've had people coming in now from all over the country, and that's been exciting. I think the downside is, you just have to make sure you have your hours covered, and you have to be open regular hours. That's probably the biggest thing. But with social media now and advertising and things, it's just been pretty amazing to me what a difference between trying to do business back then versus now. I think it really has helped having more businesses in our downtown versus 20 years ago, where I was pretty much it. It was me and a florist, and that was it. And so I think, the other part of it is we do own our building, and it's paid for, so I don't have to pay rent. So that's a huge advantage for us. And then I do have another tenant in our building that pays, that ends up paying the utilities and the insurance. So we're probably in a little bit more unique situation than a lot of people would be in, but I just love it. And when I'm sitting in the gallery, I can either paint, or what I normally do is I save my bookkeeping and my advertising and my marketing time. That's when I'm sitting in the gallery and I'm on the computer. And so it's given me a specific time for that too.
And from the standpoint of selling art, out of all the art that you sell, what percentage is sold in your own gallery?
Oh boy, it's gotten to be the lion's share of it is now through my own gallery.
Okay, all right.
So
and are they people coming through your community, or are they locals who buy us?
Yeah, it's a lot of local people, a lot of local and regional people that have found me there. So, yep.
So best advice to somebody who is considering opening their own gallery, what would you tell them?
Oh, just make sure you have a good business plan, and know that you don't sell things every day. You really have to stick to a budget. And I think, local advertising is really important. I've started doing my paper newsletter more often. I never did stop doing a paper newsletter, even from my real estate days. I carried it over and just made it an art newsletter eventually. And so I do that 3 to 4 times a year now and send that out to our whole local area. And then I'm advertising in some local high-end magazines here locally too, and that's really helped with the exposure for the gallery. And then also, I'm doing a lot of speaking engagements and demos and things like that, and we're doing open studio nights too at the gallery. So there's a lot of local artists that have actually come in and not only taken workshops and done the open studio, but they're buying my work too. So that's really
that's
fun.
important. I mean, you're promoting. If you own a business, you have to be constantly promoting and coming up with new ideas and being out there. And I believe you've taken a kind of a two-tiered strategy, if I'm right. Correct me if I'm wrong, but I think an artist requires or needs to have a local strategy and a national strategy. And that is locally, promoting and advertising locally, trying to draw people locally in it. And of course, if you're in a tourist location, getting in the tourism publications and so on. And then national, which is going after the collectors. You've got, I saw your painting in a gallery just the other day, actually this past weekend. And knowing that, there are national collectors who are going to run into you and see you, and building your brand and getting out there in that way, that's important too. Yeah.
And it's been interesting. I know a lot of people kind of make their reputation on the local level and then go out nationally, and mine has kind of happened backwards to that. Yeah. And I don't really know how to explain it, but it seems like, more people knew me nationally, and now that I have this national reputation, now people are finding out that I'm here, and it's like, whoa, we didn't know you were here. You're in Omaha.
Funny how
here?
That works. Well, Debra, this has been a pleasure having you on the PleinAir Podcast. Thank you for doing it today.
Oh, well, thank you so much for having me. I really appreciate it. So it's been a pleasure.
Well, thank you to Debra Joy Groesser, and thanks for all you're doing with the AIS. Are you ready for some marketing ideas?
This is the Marketing Minute with Eric Rhoads, author of the #1 Amazon bestseller, Make More Money Selling Your Art, Proven Techniques to Turn Your Passion into Profit.
In the Marketing Minute, I try to answer your art marketing questions. To give me a question or two, tell me who you are, your name and your town, and email me, eric@artmarketing.com. Today, 2 questions come from the same person, Brent in northern Utah. He says, I paint really, really small, often 5x7 or less, with watercolor pencils. I also have painted a lot of digital paintings using Art Rage, which is an app. Because of the nature of my original pieces, I believe the best way to monetize these would be to sell prints. In this way, I could even be scaled up if I desire. So my main question for you is, what's your best advice on selling prints? Well, Brent, it's an interesting question. It's one that comes up a lot. A lot of artists talk about selling prints. Selling your originals is an option, of course, but in most cases, the smaller you paint, the smaller the price. You may or may not get a lot of money for smaller paintings. It's hard to know. I haven't seen your work, but exceptional work will sell no matter what. The question is always the price point. The nice thing about your medium of pencils and painting small is you can scale it up, or if you're painting an Art Rage, an app, you can scale it up to almost any size print. The print market can be tricky, and prints are oftentimes a question for artists, but usually because they don't want to devalue their originals by making prints. Some fear that it's going to make the buyer feel like it's less of a painting if there are more prints out there, but I quite frankly think it's the opposite. I think if you have a couple of really good paintings, I wouldn't do it with everyone, have a couple of really good paintings, you make prints of those, you're ahead of the game. If you're the buyer, because you have the original. And of course, others can have a print, but it's not the original. And of course, they can be signed and numbered if you want to do that. So I don't think it hurts you. And of course, the question becomes, where do you distribute and sell these prints? You do it online, you do it in a gallery. There are lots of online sites willing to carry your images and print on demand. And you want to vet out their quality before picking them, because you want to see if they're going to get your colors right, they're going to do nice paper and so on, and dig around until you find somebody to do that. Now, you can also work with a print distributor. Some of these companies sell to galleries or hotels or even places like Target. They mass produce them, so they're not necessarily printing them out as giclée prints, but they're mass producing, printing them. And then they pay you a per print fee or a royalty of some kind. It's not a lot of money, but it can add up if you get a lot of volume. And of course, if you're at a place like Target, they may sell thousands or maybe tens of thousands. So lots of these companies can also do licensing your work. And I see your second question here is about licensing the images, but you have no idea how that works. Well, licensing is a big industry. For those who don't understand it, let's start by saying that if you have a brand name, let's say it's Coca-Cola, Coke will license their image, and you'll see it on products. You know, if you walk into any gift shop, you might see nostalgic Coca-Cola posters with Santa Claus, or you might see the polar bear as a stuffed toy. They don't make all those products, they license them. And people who make products go around and find people who have interesting names that they can logo, put their logos on their products. So a friend of mine does this with prints, or not prints, but with paintings. So he has a deal with a major licensing firm who sells his license of his images, and they represent him at the big annual licensing conference where people shop for brands for their products. In his case, his paintings go on calendars and mouse pads and coffee mugs and you name it, T-shirts. He gets a percentage of everything sold. It's negotiated for him by the firm, and they keep a percentage for doing it for him. And he's making a few extra $1,000 a month, which is not so bad. Some years are good, some years are not good, depends on how things do, you know, and art styles can be cyclical. But he's been consistent for about 20 years, getting money every single month from paintings that he could have only sold one time. And so this way he gets more money out of his painting. So I think it's a good thing. But you want to find a professional licensing firm that's going to be trustworthy, do it all for you, because trying to do this on your own is not good use of your time. These people know their market. Well, I hope this has been helpful. This has been the Art Marketing Minute.
This has been the Marketing Minute with Eric Rhoads. You can learn more at artmarketing.com.
A reminder to grab the remaining seats at the PleinAir convention and or get on the wait list, and also get your entries in for the PleinAir Salon. If you've not seen my Sunday morning blog, Sunday Coffee, check it out. You can find it for free at coffeewitheric.com. I don't know if it's posted on the PleinAir magazine website, outdoorpainter.com. It might be. I'll check that out. Anyway, you could check it out too. Anyway, this is fun. We'll do it again sometime. Next week, we'll see. I'll try to get something pre-recorded for while I'm in Russia, or maybe I'll record something while I'm over there and do a Russian podcast. You may have to learn how to speak Russian, though. I'm just saying. Okay, well, I'm Eric Rhoads, publisher and founder of PleinAir Magazine. Remember, it's a big world out there. I'm about to find that out, and I'm going to go paint it. You should do that, too. We'll see you. Bye-bye.
This has been the PleinAir Podcast with PleinAir Magazine's Eric Rhoads. You can help spread the word about plein air painting by sharing this podcast with your friends. And you can leave a review or subscribe on iTunes so it comes to you every week. And you can even reach Eric by email, eric@pleinairmagazine.com. Be sure to pick up our free ebook, 240 plein air painting tips by some of America's top painters. It's free at pleinairtips.com. Tune in next week for more great interviews. Thanks for listening.